Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and it's time for part 7, and this may or may not be the final part I do of this series of discussing the basics of conjugate style training. And we use the bench press as an example because the question then becomes, well, how do we pick accessory movements and assistance movements? And so that people understand the difference, remember, assistance movements share bar path and movement pattern with the primary movement you want to improve, right, which you'll see me do one of here in a minute. And most of your max effort lifts, right, the different lifts that you rotate through on max effort day would count as assistance movements, like benching with chains or doing a floor press is an assistance movement for the bench press. Whereas an accessory movement brings up weak muscles involved that may or may not have a limited amount of movement pattern carryover. But oftentimes it even works specific weak heads and functions inside of a smaller muscle, which still causes hypertrophy that gives you carryover to the main lift. So let's take the bench press here, for example. Now this is not max work, this is my back off work, but I'm weak on my triceps on the bench press. My triceps are a bit of a weak link. As you guys notice, I'm always really strong off the pause. And if you look at my chest versus my triceps, my arms are a bit smaller than my chest, and it's very obvious they're a weak link in all my pressing. So in my case, just using me as an example, but this will teach you how to do this for yourself. Looking at the different lifts and saying, okay, well, where's my weakness? I'm a little slow further up, so I struggle with driving through. Triceps would help. And it's not to say everything else doesn't need to improve, but you would look at that and say, okay, how do I fix that? Well, for a lot of your max effort lifts, you might say, okay, well, since I am a little slower at the top, maybe picking more accommodating resistance, such as, again, these chain benches, reverse band benches, benching against bands to work on that a bit. And these are close variations that still give you strength through the bottom, so you're still training the entire lift. You're just working the weak point a little bit, which is oftentimes accepted to be generally tricep dominant. But, you know, the tricep is used to the entire bench. But in my case, my triceps need to come up. So you say, okay, well, I'm going to work on all these for my max effort lifts. I'm going to work on just exercises for max effort days that work on my weakest parts from the lift, right? You train the whole lift, it's just a slight emphasis. Well, then we have to get into the question of, well, wait a minute. What happens when those stall? Because you can't always just increase forever on those. You can't just come in and hit maxes on those. How do we get stronger at a chain bench press? How do we get stronger at a chain bench press? Well, you probably have to pick some accessory movements that help with that, right? We could do some closed grip bench. We could do some weighted dips. We could do things that are very tricep dominant. Or in the case of what you guys see me do after this one, what I did on a recent workout, did 5 sets of 6 on a floor press with a slightly narrower grip. You know, I brought my grip in just a hair with a little bit of chain on there. Right? Now that is a movement you can do as a true accessory that still counts as an assistance movement. It's really both, but you're doing it for volume, right? You say, okay, well, this will help. This will help a lot because you're now training something that's similar to the movement pattern that you can do a bunch of volume with that'll help you be a little bit more tricep dominant. So we're getting tricep hypertrophy in here, you know, while still getting other things happening, while still using the chest, while still training the basic movement pattern. But this is if we only want to do assistance movements, because what happens when this stuff starts to stall? I mean, you can add lifts like this in and they'll help, because here's what makes you stronger on your max effort lifts. All your max effort training is just about learning to push with a max. You only get a modest, very modest training effect from it. The same even with the variations you do. When you pick those variations, a lot of times we're picking variations that are harder where we're weakest. And if we get stronger on those, then we know we're getting stronger at our classical lift, right? So if you're weaker because the bar slows and you struggle to drive through on the bench and maybe you have weak triceps, if your chain bench and reverse band bench keep going up, then you know you're improving. But if that's all you do, what's going to happen? Those are going to stall eventually too. They're going to slow way down. So then you say, okay, well, I need to do some volume with another movement like this. Let me pick this other exercise, do some stuff like this. This will help thicken those muscles up while still training the movement pattern, but lets me get more training volume in. And this is easier to recover from, right? This is easier to recover from than a classic lift. But what happens when that stalls? Well, you don't want that to stall, do you? That's why you need to do other things. How about a J-arm press? All right, now we have a multi-joint exercise that is extremely tricep focused. This is an exercise you would do to make sure that your triceps are growing and getting thicker, that they're improving. It's still a multi-joint exercise. This has a little bit of carryover, but not much. A little bit of movement pattern carryover to the bench, but it's like a hybrid between a skull crusher and a closed grip bench press. And it works the triceps in the same way they get worked on the bench press. The chest doesn't get worked the same, right? But the triceps get worked in the same sort of recruitment pattern that they do on a bench press. Well, this will make your triceps stronger relative to your bench press. And if you come in and do a bunch of volume with it, guess what? Even though it's not maximum strength, you're training the heads of the tricep that are working the bench with more volume than you would be able to bench with and get away with, right? Well, now we're getting training volume. And we're targeting those heads of the tricep through a movement pattern that's very similar to the bench. So they will hypertrophy in all the places that get worked on a bench press. Well, as long as we're continuing to increase volume on any muscle group, as long as we're within our maximum recoverable volume, we're going to grow from it. Right? Now, does that mean that if you start adding all this in, you've got to obviously make sure your lifestyle will facilitate that recovery and growth? Rest, nutrition, everything else, right? But you can do lifts like this to make sure that your other lifts improve. And so, you'll look at something and realize that that chain bench is going up. It's probably because of the exercises like this. And if you come in and progress on these and do enough volume on them, that will cause your bench press to go up, and it will cause your assistance movements that help your bench press go up and judge your bench press. Will help you get better at those. Even if you say, okay, I want to do closed grip bench press in order to build my bench because I'm weaker on my triceps. Okay, that's fine. But then you have to eventually realize that big lift could stall. How do you keep it from stalling? With an exercise like this, we come in and start doing increasing volume on an exercise like this. You start increasing weight on it and increasing volume. Because we can't really increase our volume on our big lifts that much. What happens? We stall. Just like if you start adding in several big multi-joint exercises, eventually you reach a threshold where you can't keep adding volume on them. You can't. They stall. You can only handle so much volume in a day. So you've either got to increase weight or increase volume. So even your bigger assistance movements will start moving you forward, but if left to their own devices completely on their own, even if you try to program them carefully, you will start to run into recovery and maximum recoverable volume limits. And so you pick exercises like this that allow you to continue to work the triceps harder. But what happens if this starts to stall? Well, you don't let it stall. That's when you add in additional other supplemental lifts. That's when you say, okay, how do I make sure that my triceps are getting more volume? What if I can only handle so many sets of this? I mean, at a certain point, you're really only going to do so many sets of JM presses. Or what happens when the JM press stalls? What happens when your smaller exercise stalls? Well, when the accessory movement stops working, you have to add another new accessory. And in some cases, it might be a smaller lift like this, or you add an additional smaller supplemental lift, right? One that hammers the triceps. And in this case, it could be something really light for you're doing even more reps with more volume. That's at this point just a little fluff exercise, but it has an overspeed eccentric component, has a stretch reflex component. It's working the triceps. Well, this will thicken your triceps up, and if your triceps get thicker, and with an exercise that increases work capacity, you'll probably go back and find that your JM press will go up a little bit. And if your JM press is going up still, then you'll notice that chain bench and reverse band bench going up. And if those are going up, then you know your bench press is going up until you reach a point to where your weaknesses in your bench press are no longer being addressed by them. Then you find your newest weakness and you pick appropriate exercises to build and test it, and you repeat this process. But the point is that you always have to be mindful of avoiding stagnation. And it's not necessarily the muscle confusion concept that bodybuilders try to use. It's the concept of we are avoiding accommodation. We're avoiding the repeat bout effect. We are always pushing each performance element to its limit. You're training every single performance element. And then you are picking other exercises that will facilitate new adaptation that help you avoid stagnation. But the goal is always to keep increasing your big exercises and your close variations of your classical lifts. You're always trying to increase them actively. But with those, you can only really do your maximum effort work and your dynamic effort work. You're going to run into recovery issues and overuse injuries at a certain point if you just keep trying to do more and more of those. So we pick other exercises to hypertrophy all the weak areas of the muscles in the way that we need them to grow. And you need to be thinking in terms of one, maximum size overall, but also where do I need to add size that's going to make me stronger quicker? Right? What's going to help my squat, deadlift, bench, and these things go up fastest if I add meat here? Because if they all go up, then everything keeps growing. But we are trying to always avoid stalling. We want to be making continual progress all the time. And that's the way a system like this is designed to work. And you pick your exercises accordingly. And if you mess up and you don't get stronger at the right exercises, if you don't get stronger at the right exercises that are going to make you stronger, you don't add more volume on the exercises that are going to thicken you up in the places that are going to make you stronger at the right exercises, your overall strength is going to suffer. So this is actually critical to a system like this, is picking the right assistance and accessory movements to keep you from stagnating, to keep you from plateauing. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.